Okay. All right. Well, thanks again for coming. Let me introduce our speaker. I'm Margaret Fisher. I'm co-clerk with Dana Bailey of the Right Relationship with Animal Working Group. And we also have Ralph Hutton, who's the clerk of the Unity with Nature Committee. And we are co-sponsoring this event. Our format will be, as you might guess, for Becky to present. I think she mentioned it'd be about 20 minutes or so, and then take questions, which we will read from the questions that you submitted ahead of time and from the chat. And if before 7:15 there's still time for more questions, we could always open it up then, but we're planning to finish at 7:15. So Becky Ramsing is a senior program officer in food communities and public health at the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. She oversees research, communication, evaluation, and programming that facilitate a shift to sustainable, healthy diets that are plant-centric and lower in meat. And she is responsible for managing the center's science advisory role with the Meatless Monday campaign. Linking nutrition with agriculture has been a focus of her passion and work over the past years, from working with local farmers and food suppliers to promoting consumption of local foods to helping resource-limited families here and abroad access fresh, affordable food. So, and she mentioned when I wrote to ask if she would speak, that this is definitely not something that they usually do. So she's just doing it totally to be nice on her own time, and we really are grateful to you, Becky. Thank you.
We are.
And don't forget to mute everybody right now.
Thank you. Yes, but I have spent most of my career working in community health. And so I have a real soft spot for working with groups who are, want to bring about change and in their community. So when I heard this, I was very happy to do it. So thank you. Okay, I'm going to go share my screen and just want to put it into the from start, and you see the real one, right?
We don't see the right one. We need the other one.
Okay, great. I will swap displays. I knew that would happen. How's that?
That worked.
All right, great. I don't know how it always happens the wrong way. So yeah, I thought today we just give a little bit overview of one aspect of the work we do, looking at the connection of diet and the environment. As Margaret mentioned, I work for the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. We are part of the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, and we've been around as a center, an academic center, for about 25 years. Our mission is healthy, equitable, resilient food systems. We work really at the center, the connection of public health and sustainable and the food system. And I would say our work is driven by the concept that public health, diet, food production, the ecosystems are deeply interrelated, and that understanding these relationships is critical if we're going to pursue a livable future. Okay, sorry. And so here's just a little background on some of the work we do: research, education, policy, and practice from local to global. Some of the theme areas we cover are food animal production, climate change, food equity, food policy, diet, health, and planetary boundaries, reducing food waste, seafood, food system resilience, and we work also specifically with the Baltimore food system. My area is really around nutrition and diets. I've been a dietitian for over 30 years, and so I've worked on the consumption side of things, but I really love being at this center because after being, on the nutrition side of things, and really look at the broader food system has been really important to me to, when I started working with families and farmers, when I was working with the University of Maryland Extension, I, really had, just seeing how important was how your food was grown, how it was accessed, whether or not people can access it, looking at the local producers and all then how that ties together. Also, as I worked internationally, the same thing. So I feel really privileged to be where I'm at now, working at this intersection. I just want to show you this framework. There's a lot of different ways when you talk about food systems, a lot of different ways you can picture them. I like this one. This is particularly put out by the Academy of Nutrition. And it's the Sustainable and Resilient and Healthy Food Water Systems Framework. As you can see, it has a lot on it, but you can see these 4 circles, and that these in this type of system, the sustainable and resilient, it's important that all these areas are overlapping and circular. So nutrition and health, social, cultural, and ethics, environmental stewardship, and economic vitality. You can't have a sustainable food system without these 4 domains really really working together. So they're interconnected and they're overlapping. And also to remember, as we think about solutions, they're not linear. If you make if you just change one thing, there's feedback loops all the way around. So just always trying to think more systemically, more broadly when we make decisions and when we do actions. So just a framework to take with you as we go into this talk and others as we think about the food system. So a lot of different aspects of the food system and diet and climate and environment, but I'm going to speak most of the time on the climate. Because climate change is really one of the greatest public health, ecological, and economic threats of our generation, and now, as we know, generations to come. We see flooding, droughts, heat waves, extreme weather, and like seasonal changes that have an immeasurable burden on morbidity, mortality, and economics. And as we've seen, they really impact those who are vulnerable and poor, who live day to day more than those of us who are living in the United States or in higher income countries where we're not as directly impacted by climate change. So just even though we may be able to weather it a little better, just realizing that it impacts other people even more directly. This is so when we talk about climate change, we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, and those are nitrogen, methane, and carbon dioxide that are connected to the increase in the temperatures and climate change, these greenhouse gases. So we put them together often in greenhouse gas emissions. And this is a little confusing slide. I have a clearer one next, but just showing where there's different ways of calculating where they come from. The first one on the left is a study that we use a lot from 2018, and you can see there that's showing about all that one pillar is all from food production, everything related to food, agriculture production, land use, transport, food processing. The one on the right is a more recent study where they looked at post-retail carbon emissions as well. And the first one, they said about 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions are from the food system. So that's a lot, that's over 25%. This other study actually estimated at 34%. So depending on how you do the math, there's a lot of different ways. It's just how we grow and produce and eat food has a big impact on our on greenhouse gas emissions and climate. Here's just a simple way, really saying the same thing. All the other sectors besides food, 65% of our global greenhouse gases. This shows, and then you see transportation that we've pulled out there, as well as agriculture, livestock, and other agriculture. And you see livestock animal production is about the same. Actually, some estimates are 14.5% than transportation. So we often hear about electric cars and vehicles being really important, and they are, but we cannot ignore the impact that livestock and raising animals for food has on climate. So when you think about what emissions come from livestock, it comes from a variety of different places. The biggest contribution is enteric fermentation, and that is basically cow burps. And so cows have a more disproportional produce a disproportional amount of greenhouse gases compared to a lot of other animals. Greenhouse gas emissions also come from manure, feed crops, so just growing food for animals, and also just cutting down trees, especially in countries like Brazil where the rainforest is cut down, pasture land, and energy use. So there's just many different places that the greenhouse gases come from raising animals for food. Here we have the greenhouse gas intensity. This is from a study that we've done, and I'll talk a little bit more about, of producing different foods. And you can see here, the y-axis there is the greenhouse gas kilograms per carbon dioxide per serving of food. So we did this by how much like one serving is, rather than sometimes you'll see things like protein or kilograms, but this is per serving, just to give you a little more reference to what you might actually eat. And you see here that the foods that come from animals are much, much higher. So over on the right, when it says bovine meat, that's beef. And the darker colors is really from the land use change there, the dark red and yellow. So that's from the crops and from cutting down forest. Here's our sheep and goats, which are also ruminant meats. And then we have our pork. Seafood has a very much actually what our study is one of the few that talk about seafood, but it varies a lot depending on how the seafood is caught and raised. And then our dairy products are also high, but not as high because this, again, one cow can produce a lot more milk. But then you see over here on the left is our foods that come from plants, and they're much lower in greenhouse gas. In fact, not even on this chart. So just thinking about the foods we eat and how they impact greenhouse gases, there is a stark difference between an animal food compared to a plant food. Oh, and I'll go back just quickly. If you see over here, there's a few animal foods that are just a little bit that have a different picture. So you see forage fish, bivalve mollusks, and insects are interesting because they actually are much lower. So they're, that's another thing to consider if you want to really have a low greenhouse gas diet. So that's forage fish like sardines, and mollusks are like filter feeders like oysters. So they don't consume food, and so they're a lot lower. Just an interesting fact. Okay, so what's the role of food in agriculture and climate change mitigation? In 2016, and the Paris Agreement, and they made an agreement to try to keep global average temperatures rise well below 2 degrees centigrade by 2050. That's equivalent to the pre-industrial era. Other research since then has said, actually, we really need to have it below 1.5 degrees Celsius in order to prevent catastrophic climate change and impacting, food, impacting all of us, the population, the planet. This is another way I thought that was a great way to put it. So here's on the left are the greenhouse gas emissions in 2010. All the yellow is industry, transports, building, energy, and the orange is just agricultural only. And that's 2010. This box over here is if we didn't change anything in how we ate and how we produce food, and we continued on the trajectory of, eating more meat, especially, around the world, the meat consumption is growing globally with economics and a larger population. There's more people are wealthier and can afford more meat. That's what would happen in 2050. This is that line, that 2 degrees line set by the climate committee and the Paris Climate Agreement. So you can see right away, there's a little bit of a problem here because you have to stick if we didn't change anything, we'd have to stick all of that, everything except agriculture into that tiny little space. So the budget for changing that is really small. So we could do a lot. We could have solar energy and electric transportation, have fewer children, but still really hard to fit all that. So we have to change how we grow in food and consume food and use our food in order to really make an impact on the climate. So this is some modelings from different studies. So we looked at different studies when we kicked off our work several years ago, and was eating 75% meat and dairy globally, you can lower it some. And then if we also cut out food waste, which is also a big contributor to climate change, which I'm not going to talk a lot about tonight, you can actually bring it down to a reasonable amount where we could actually, do all the technology we need in the other sectors and potentially keep the climate change, meet those targets. And these messages have been reinforced throughout scientific literature. So it's well established that we do need to reduce our meat and dairy intake. But the question is how. How is always difficult, and how much, all those questions. So a study that we did in 2019, we looked at different diets, country-specific diets, which was really interesting. We looked at actually what that in that country people consume and where the food comes from in terms of like imports and exports. And we model different diets based on their baseline consumption. This one is for the United States only. And you can see each of the stacked bars is the greenhouse gas emissions from that diet. And the colors indicate different types of food, different food groups. So the red there is your bovine meat. The green ones are the plant foods. The blue is dairy. Let's see, poultry is orange, the chickens. So here you see the baseline is much higher, and the different, as we go more plant forward in the diets, we lower the actual greenhouse gas emissions. So one is the meatless day, eating less red meat, a lacto-ovo-vegetarian diet where you just have dairy and eggs but no meat. Pescatarian is fish, and as well as dairy and eggs. 2/3 vegan is where basically 2 out of 3 meals you don't eat meat or any animal products, and then on the 3rd meal you do. So it could be like, the weekend, like a weekend, eat 5 days a week without vegan and have the weekend eat your meat and your dairy and everything. So different ways you can do this 2/3 vegan. Low food chain is where we modeled actually including those insects and those bivalve mollusks in there if you want to have a little, and then completely vegan otherwise. And then vegan, of course, is going to be the lowest. And again, this is a US only in this one. And so here's the target that was set by the Eat Lancet Commission. It's I'll talk a little bit about that. It was a commission of experts a couple years ago and they set this target. And you can see it's difficult to meet that target line. And only the ones that really have very little animal products can meet that. But again, we're not saying here that everybody needs to go vegan, but just to show that that we do need to bring it a lot lower, and animal products need to be part of that solution. So this kind of stepwise transition toward more plant forward, as we call them, diets. This is a great way to show. So every country, like I told you, we did did it by country, and one thing we considered, and it's really important to consider, is that we can say this in the United States, eat less meat, but we have a very our baseline diet has plenty of protein and nutrition in it, whereas in many countries they're not getting enough protein or calories. So we actually modeled the diets to get enough, like a protein floor, enough protein, have enough fruits and vegetables, and be a generally healthy diet. And in some countries, actually, we showed they actually need to have higher greenhouse gases. So we can't use the same standards for a high income country as in a lower income country. We need to be really cognizant of the health of our population, like our human capital. This slide shows what the Eat Lancet diet, or the Planetary Health Diet. That same commission I talked about modeled a diet that was also met health needs as well as climate needs. And I think the servings, I don't have it written down here, but it has about one serving of red meat a week, lower in dairy, but not dairy free, also in poultry, but lots of fruits and vegetables, beans, and nuts. So very healthy diet. But what they did show, even when we modeled that, we have another paper, we modeled this diet, and we did show that in the blue countries like ours, you could actually decrease your greenhouse gas emissions with that diet. But in some countries, of course, the greenhouse gas emissions would increase. So again, even more important for higher income countries like ours to eat less meat and to shift to these healthier diets. And again, this is another thing, this is nothing new, but we are in the top 10 these are the red ones, the top 10 meat consuming countries. So certainly we eat plenty of meat and protein above our needs. If you look at the average American diet, not everyone, but definitely. This shows that, it's not just, I've spent most of the time on climate up till now, what we eat also impacts, and how we grow food impacts other environmental indicators. Land use, for instance, about over 50% of our habitable land is taken up by agriculture. Over 70% of our fresh water is used by agriculture. And that's really important, especially in countries that water is just becoming much more of a scarce resource with climate change. Water pollution is a big problem, and aquifers are polluted, and the ocean as well. So about agriculture contributes to about 78% of the eutrophication of water pollution, and also just takes up a big amount of our biodiversity. Livestock is is responsible for biodiversity loss as well. Okay, so I'm trying not to say all bad news, but just talk about how can we do this? How can we shift to, you know, to how our actions can shift to, you know, for the better of the planet and our own health. And we do know also for health that diets higher in plant-based foods and lower in red and processed meats especially are associated with better health outcomes, especially in the US and higher income countries. Studies have found that lower rates of diabetes, heart disease, and overall mortality when red and processed meats are replaced with nuts, legumes and beans, whole grains, low-fat dairy, and fish. Another recent study I thought was interesting that followed over 120,000 people for 20 years, and they recorded weight changes every 4 years. And they categorized these food groups that they ate and the frequency that the people ate them. People who gained more weight and had more chronic health issues at the end of the time ate more red and processed meat. They also had more refined grains, sugars, and sugar-sweetened beverages, fried foods, and alcohol. And people who gained less weight ate more vegetables, nuts, whole grains, whole fruits, and yogurt. So a healthy diet is not just about removing one food, but it's about a whole pattern of nutritious foods, just to keep that in mind. So after running through a myriad of issues to keep in mind for sustainable diets, I think I'll bring it down to 10. So here's kind of some recommendations and guiding principles. I'll go through real quickly, then I'll talk about maybe some of the efforts, stepwise things that we can do toward getting to healthier, planet-friendly diet. So one is just thinking about, can I replace my animal proteins with vegetable proteins for 2 to 3 meals a week or more? Can I make that, you know, what shifts can I make? It doesn't have to be every day, but can I do that? Can I emphasize smaller portions of better meat? So meat that might be grass-fed meat or better than for the other factors in the environment. How about choosing sustainable seafood? Emphasize sustainably produced foods when you can afford it, like organic or sustainable farming practices, purchasing produce in season, having a variety of produce, dairy in moderate portions, and considering some plant-based alternatives, although dairy is, you know, that's one of those things that actually has a lot of health benefits, even though it has more climate consequences. Choosing whole grains always or often, having less processed and less packaged foods, using whole foods more often, and focusing on diversity and variety, eating a lot of different types of foods. But we know helping individuals as well as institutions or groups we work with shift what they eat is not easy, as we all know. Meat consumption specifically has many cultural, health, and social drivers. One action or movement that has been gained recognition since 2003 is the Meatless Monday campaign. As Margaret mentioned, we are science advisors, and we've been science advisors since the campaign began in 2003. It encourages people to go without meat once a week for personal health and the health of the planet. It actually started to address the health impacts of high meat consumption and was modeled after the meatless days that were promoted by the government in World War I and II as a patriotic action to save resources for the troops. But today, Meatless Monday is a simple first step toward a more sustainable diet. And it's really doable. And I think that's why it's picked up so quickly and so broadly. Many institutions, restaurants, celebrities, bloggers, you know, Oprah, Beyonce, have also taken on Meatless Monday. So there's this collective energy building around this movement. And it's one of the most hashtag health campaigns with over 4 billion social media impressions in 2019. So it's a good way to think about how we can get that shift, especially people who are not familiar with this whole reducing meat is a whole new topic for them. And, you know, I don't want to give up my hamburger. Those things. So Meatless Monday is a good way to start getting people to talk and think. It really is quite brilliant, actually, in practice and how it's worked. Really very little funding that this concept has taken on. Many rightly point out that a meatless day is only a small change and won't be enough, but we argue a small change could be more powerful and long-lasting than a big behavior change, and we actually have evidence showing that, because big behavior change tend not to last. If you know, people who go vegan overnight tend not to stay vegan, but you know, those smaller shifts can make a difference, especially when more people are doing it. So this slide shows that the current vegans and vegetarians are under 3% of the population, actually growing a little bit, are vegans or vegetarians, and that their impact is really equivalent to taking about 3 million cars off the road. But if you get 30% of people to do Meatless Monday, it's about the same, 2.8 million cars off the road, the equivalent, the equivalent emissions that they would save. But if you get half the population to do Meatless Monday, it's about it's almost double, about 4.7 or 5 million cars off the road. So 3.3% reduction of our food related greenhouse gases. So, those little steps are important and impactful. We also have, actually, I'll show you the next slide. So we've done some surveys just understanding, why people reduce meat, how you can get them. And this is some of the reasons that they reduce meat. And most people really is eating healthier. That is the big driver. Even younger people who know more about climate or might be interested in the environment, health is still the main driver probably because it impacts me today. And it might be avoiding chronic disease or losing weight. It might be just for strength or just feeling better. But health is the most important driver that people will reduce meat. But also saving money, enjoying the meals, saving money. Animal welfare, interesting, is just not as much of a driver among some people, but among most. But it's really important if you're trying to get people to reduce meat, use the message that's going to stick with them first, and then you can bring in other messages in the conversation as people get on the bandwagon, so to speak. We also looked at questions like how has Meatless Monday changed our cooking and eating habits? And we do have some evidence that people who do Meatless Monday or think about it will actually make other changes throughout the week. So, this one day impact can grow. And we're actually in the middle of a big survey now among all the people who've gotten the Meatless Monday newsletter, looking at what other dietary changes they've made. And it's pretty exciting to learn. But what we've learned from some surveys is they eat more fruits and vegetables, they eat less meat overall. They try new recipes at home. They'll eat more meatless meals during the week. They'll eat more meatless meals when they're eating out. And we also did another survey that is not in this picture of how people reduce meat. And only 8% of people said, I just stopped eating meat. Most people, the majority of people did things like eating less meat one meal a week, or just purchasing less meat, eating smaller portions. So just a way to think about as you if you're committed or want to talk about how you can change what we eat, it's just those small changes. And Meatless Monday could be a way, or something similar that you could do. So that's about all I have here. This is, if you want to keep in touch with us, this is our website. We have some great information there. It's jhsph.edu/CLF, or you could also just Google Livable Future. We have a global Meatless Monday site. If you're interested in if you do any work globally, where we have people who are interested in Meatless Monday or other meat reduction, not just Meatless Monday, who can just network on that. But you can find all those, and then a lot of courses. We have some free Coursera courses if you want to learn about the food system, and you can find that all on our website, or you can connect with me. So I think that's all I have, and I will stop sharing, and then we can go through our questions. That's all right. Okay.
If you would, please, if you have a question, please raise your hand physically rather than digitally. I'm not sure everyone knows the raising the hand part, but then I'll go around and try to take the questions. Deirdre?
Becky, could you give us the website again, or put it in the chat?
Oh, sure. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank
That's
you.
probably the easiest.
Thank you.
We had some questions that were sent in ahead of time. Would you like me to read them, Ralph, or do you have them? How do you want to do that?
Yes, if you would read them, that'd be great.
Okay, so one of them, and this is a very interesting question for me also, what kind of non-dairy milk is least destructive to the environment?
Great question. We're actually doing a paper on that right now. But the ones, I would say the ones that come from the bean or legume types, so the pea milk protein, which that as being a legume or bean is actually better. The way it's grown in the soil is actually good for the soil. Soy milk actually is, so soy milk is interesting because it gets a lot of bad rap because 95% of the soy we produce is for animal feed. And so it's monocropped, it's GMO sources, but very little of the soy actually goes to milk. So I would encourage you probably make sure it's more of a sustainably sourced soy milk. But as a product, it's in the mouth is grown for human food, it's good and healthy. So I would say soy milks. Almond milk, honestly, nutritionally not a great pick. It's very low in protein, really doesn't have a lot of nutrition, lacking a lot, and growing almonds uses quite a lot of water. Oat milk is pretty sustainable, but not, if you're, but actually it's very sustainable, but lots of, not very high in protein or nutrients. So if you want to combine the nutrition and the sustainability, I would look for the pea protein milk, or I think pea milk is a bad name, so they call it like plant protein milk, which is getting more common. Peanut milk is another one, could be also higher in protein, but certainly lots of options out there. But the biggest growing, actually, almond milk has taken over soy milk, and now oat milk has just taken over soy milk in popularity.
The soy is like Roundup Ready soy. Is that how it's grown?
Not all soy, but a lot of it, but most of that soy goes for animal feed. 95% of the soy. So, if you're looking for soy milk, it's not much more expensive to go for an organic soy milk. I think at the price point for soy milk, so I would probably choose that.
Okay, great.
But the soy for human consumption is not, I don't think it's grown generally, don't quote me on that, it's generally not grown in the way that the Roundup Ready, but.
Okay.
And Laurie Wilner had a question. I know you said you weren't going to go into food waste, but can you give us some key takeaways?
From food waste, yeah, food waste. That could be a whole nother presentation. But food waste, we waste about 30% of our food, and one of the interesting, I think one of the most, if you took all the food waste globally and the greenhouse gas emissions that come from food waste together, and you put it into like a country, it would be the third largest country of emitters. It'd be China, US, or US and China, they keep switching, and then and then the food waste would be the third. So it's a big, it contributes a lot because of the methane and from dumping the food, and you're also all the greenhouse and emissions it takes to actually produce that food and then go to waste. So watching, try not to waste food, shopping for what you're going to eat using your leftovers. When you can't do anything, compost it, but that's not the only solution. Is really eating less and buying less, and not wasting is the most important.
Meg Green had a question.
I had just been interested in the articles that you cited. I love the graphics, and they're very powerful for sharing with others. I work in global health, and I can see myself using those things. So I was able to find one of the articles. If you were able to share the others,
absolutely,
that would be great.
I can do that afterwards. Also, they're on the ones from our center are on the website, so you can get. I know the Kim et al. One is on our site, but yeah, I will. Let me write a note that. And can I do that after the fact? Yeah, or if I could do it, maybe if I have time before we're done.
And Philip Bogdanoff had a question.
Hang on. Okay.
I actually submitted one before regarding the carbon negative beef that's raised by White Oak Pastures. Are you familiar with the whole regenerative ag holistic management system, which is now trying to reclaim degraded land? And there's also another book, I don't know if you've seen this yet, Sacred Cow.
Yep.
It's basically saying it's not so much the animal, it's not the cow, it's the how. And the problem is that those animals, co-evolved with grasslands, and they're important for the ecology that they be on the grasslands. And we perverted them by putting them into concentrated animal feed operations, feeding them things that they're not really designed to digest, et cetera, et cetera. And we created a big pollution problem, but if they're managed properly, they can actually produce healthier beef, as well as help to restore very biodiverse, farmland, rangelands, and have many other co-benefits in terms of, reducing, localized regional heat by cooling the land, et cetera, et cetera. So just wondered if you had any thoughts about that. It's a fast-growing movement.
Yeah. Certainly, I have thoughts. I am definitely not an expert in that field, but there are people that are with something we talk about a lot. I do know that yes, raising animals on grass can be much better for the soil and the environment. it's not, this whole thing about carbon sequestration is a little more complicated. As I understand that you can actually sequester, there's a limit to how much carbon you can sequester in there. And it does show that actually grass-fed beef, if you look per cow, which is actually really interesting, per cow is actually can be higher than those in the concentrated animal feeding operation. So you have to think about animal welfare in this too, because there's some arguments, and there's some people are arguing that if you raise them in these CAFOs, in these industrial ways, you can actually manage the methane better. But then if you look at the, there's all kinds of other issues with manure. So that's why you look at this whole system, not at one thing. So yeah, definitely really good ways. There's really some beneficial ways of raising animals. Can we raise them to the scale that we can, that we want to? Can we raise enough animals in that way to meet the demand for meat in the United States? And we think about where we're getting our feed overseas and everything. So that's the biggest question. So there's a whole saying like less meat, better meat. Yeah. And I think that is, yes, better meat when we have meat. But I think my understanding is we still need to eat a lot less because we're not to the point where we can raise animals enough in that way.
This could be a long discussion, but I just want to make two corrections there. When the white men got to the Great Plains, there was 6 to 8 feet of topsoil that had been created by the buffalo, the antelope interacting with the grassland. So there's virtually, as far as we know, no limit to the accumulation of carbon in soil by continuing to build up the soil. And second, we had 60 to 120 million of those buffalo antelopes, roughly a little bit more than currently are in CAFOs. And the methane was not a problem before we industrialized agriculture. So it's not the cow, it's the how.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue that. I mean, the soil thing, yes, definitely. And then you could see those maps that show the degradation of the soil across the plains are really, really, really dangerous, levels. And so that takes a long time to build that back up. So, yeah, I think
you can actually do about half an inch a year.
Great. All right. I'm going to leave it at that. You seem to be the expert here.
Lois Carter
But I would
Crawford.
love, we had you might want to go to our site. We had a really interesting speaker at one of our things that raises bison, really interesting at one of our events. And you may find it, I think you would find that interesting. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
Lois Carter Crawford had a question on CSA.
I didn't really have a question. I was just commenting that my husband and I joined a community-sponsored agriculture and find that we waste far less food because we get whatever vegetables they give us that week and we use those vegetables or fruits. And you're eating whatever's in season.
Yep.
You have to be creative because you might get cauliflower 3 weeks in a row, and that's a lot of cauliflower for 2 people. So anyway, it's
absolutely. I love that. I do the same thing. I get it. I do the Hungry Harvest, where you get the food that's that might be thrown out, and it makes me get really creative. The other day I was like, okay, I've had same thing, your cauliflower example. I'd had a lot of cauliflowers. I'm like, I'm going to learn how to make cauliflower rice just because I wanted something different, because I love roasting it, and it was good. I had fun. So yeah, it makes you.
I do a recipe website called Recipe Idea Shop, and tonight we had cauliflower.
Excellent.
I have a cauliflower marsala recipe that is amazing, and it's vegan. So you could go look it up. Yeah. Recipe Idea Shop. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Andrea Yoto.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful. My question is about lab-grown meat. Mm-hmm. How is that in any way close to being an alternative? Do you know where we could find out?
I believe they're serving it in Singapore right now. Some of it, I think. it's not beef. It's either chicken or fish that they have. But yeah, it's still a long way off, but not as long as you think. So that is definitely, you know, there's a lot of money and technology going into lab grown meat. So it's definitely going to be a factor. And again, looking at a paper we put out recently, I'll find the thing on looking at alternative proteins and some of the public health impacts across the environmental impacts. Like, so there's questions around it. There's a lot of intellectual property in lab grown meat, and you know how and what is, so it's hard to assess what is the greenhouse, what is the climate impact and environmental impact of these meats. But it's very encouraging for a lot of people who are, you know, maybe want to eat meat but just don't want to eat, you know, a live animal. So yeah, and keep your eyes out. But again, you know, in the meantime, I think, you know, there's a lot of reason for us to look at other things. I mean, meat alternatives, I'll just go on about that. Meat alternatives, a lot of them are highly processed, you know, like the Impossible Burgers and Beyond Burgers. They might be great as, you know, sometimes, but also I would encourage people to get to know their legumes and their beans and their soy products. There's a lot of good foods and meals you can make, and they're great for the soil and great for them. They're good on all, they tick all the boxes. So, and that would be, you know, as you're looking at making substitutions, you know, that's a great, it's fine to try some other process alternatives, but think there's other impacts, and maybe try a bean once in a while.
Just as a note, there are several links in the chat if you scan through them that are addressed to everyone. Are there any other questions? Have I missed anyone?
Well, the one I posted in the chat, I'm sorry that you called on me for that. I didn't ask, is there, I believe, I think this is a rather old number and it may have changed. There are estimated to be 10 calories of fossil fuel behind every calorie of food we eat. And my question is, any thoughts on how we can change that ratio towards the better?
Well, it's definitely different for an animal, so a lot more. And again, you can look at it by it's more for that, similar to climate emissions. It's more for the meats and the beefs, and then for the plant foods. So again, it's really, you know, trying to put more plants in our diet. Local makes a difference. You know, you're talking about local. You know, it's local's about 11%. Transport's about 11% of the greenhouse gas from food. So production is about 80% of it. So local makes a difference, but not as big a difference as the actual production of the food.
Jean had her hand up.
Jean, sorry.
No problem. So could you comment on farm-raised fish? I mean, it seems like a good alternative if you want to eat fish, but then I hear it's real bad for the environment and bad for the fish.
The complicated thing about fish is it depends. Like some aquaculture is done really well and some not so well. We do study seafood. It's not my area, so I can say, you know, so it's a little harder. The issue with aquaculture, farm fish, is the feed. Because they're fed, a lot of them are fed crops. Then you go to all the other issues with pesticides and fertilizers and everything. They're not eating, or if they're eating other fish, you have to catch other fish, and so that's affecting. So yeah, a lot of, again, it gets complicated. But not to not eat fish. Fish is great, but I know the Monterey Bay Aquarium, that's one I would probably go to as the easiest one for their like sustainable seafood picks. You have the cards for the different regions. That's probably the biggest help, but you know. That's about all I can give you in terms of guidelines off the top of my head right now.
Thank you.
Yes, Andrea.
Yes, thank you. What about insects? Have you studied whether insect eating is sustainable? And do you see that growing in this, you know, as a alternative being marketed in this country at all?
Well, it's super sustainable, like because it's really because it's you saw on that one chart that we looked, and it is starting to grow some. I don't know, I think there's a lot of barriers it has to get over. I mean, other parts of the world people eat insects, but you see more cricket flour and all those things. So I think that we'll see more. I don't know if it'll get the uptake. I'm just supposing. What do you guys think? Would you eat it? That's a good question for everyone.
I ate some insects when I was working with a youth program, and it was a project, and one of the challenges was to eat these salted tiny little I don't know, grasshoppers or something. It just tasted salty, basically.
Yeah.
I would eat.
Well, we could test it. I mean, cicadas are coming, so you can see. This might be the good time where you can all test it and see, and then but definitely they are nutritious. They have protein, and they're fairly high in protein. I think the crickets are. So yeah.
Margaret, it's just about 7:15.
It's time. Well, thank you so much, Becky. That was really fascinating. And boy, did you get a lot of information in
You guys
a
have
short
great
period.
questions.
That was terrific. So really, really grateful to you. And thank you to everybody else for coming.
Thanks a lot. Have
Thank
a
you
great
all.
night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for
Bye-bye.
putting it
Thank you
together.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you.